Let me tell you a little story. In the late 80s, a small company based in Osaka, Japan would release one of the most successful gaming franchises to ever exist. That company was Capcom, and the game is Street Fighter. With the massive success of this revolutionary fighting game, even the good reception and high praise just wasn't enough when the time came around to release the first console port of Bionic Commando. While this was the second Bionic Commando to hit the market, the first one was an arcade game, and I don't leave my house, so I'm just going to act like it doesn't exist. Either way, the series went on to get multiple remakes, and in 2009, it happened. Bionic Commando joined the rest of us in the beautiful world of 3D. But the real question is, did anybody ask for this? To find out what truly happened on the video game side of things, we have to start with what was probably the most heavily debated when talking about why it failed, the story. Or at least what there is of a story. Can I be 100% truthful with you before we get into it? This game is only 4 hours long, and the story was nothing more than mission after mission. Getting to the end, then we find out no new information. It's a whole jumbled mess, but yeah, I guess let's just get into it then. We start out in a Supermax prison where we meet our main character, Rad Spencer. He's a Bionic Commando and tells us about the purge that happened all those years ago. We get chained and walked out by guards when we meet Joe, who lets us go, and we instantly try to choke him to death. We learn about a bomb being set off in Ascension City by a group of terrorists, and he wants to sweeten the deal by giving us information about our beloved Emily.
What the fuck does this have to do with Emily?
He launches us and our arm in separate pods into the city, and we have to fight our way through bio-rain guards, who are more than likely looking for us and our arm specifically. We find our arm and smash in a guard's face, and have to go through a tutorial, which causes us immense emotional pain. We see us beating the shit out of somebody and come back to, and this is where the story just doesn't exist. We reach a relay point, kill some people, and read some text. And that's all we do until we find out about a crashed recon plane, and we have to head to grab its black box, because as far as we can see, there's no one alive to tell us what happened. We keep heading out, doing missions, fight a Barak helicopter with the stupid fucking tarantula missiles, and continue on our merry way until we run into Mag, who is trying her hardest to convince us that she's not a bad person. We are shot at by a sniper, then we meet her again a while later in a ruin where she is still trying and ends up leaving newly asthmatic. We head through the jungle, do some more relay stuff, and finally make it to the library where something called the carry-on device is being held. We try to use the password,
access to carry-on device denied,
but it just doesn't work, and we have to fight through hordes of enemies. And head out just so we can face the mole. After beating the shit out of this Alaskan bullworm, we continue on our escapades and bring the carry-on device to Joe, who turns out is a bit of an asshole. He betrays us, takes the device for himself and Groder, and tries to kill us off. He doesn't know we aren't someone you should mess with, and we land on top of one of the other Buraks and make our way up the flock, controlling them by hand until we reach the one Joe is in. We punch the fuck out of Joe, and learn that just because we are bionic, doesn't mean we are invincible. We end up in a hole, talk to Mag, and are properly introduced to the sniper who tried to kill us before. He has our best interests in mind, unlike anybody else. And now, it's time for us to take the fight directly to Groder. On our way here, he is adamant that our arm was really our wife the entire time. After making our way onto the giant scarab thing, we kill everyone, absolutely destroy everything, and fight Groder in his roided up robot phase. And just like professional boxers say, more muscle, you gas out quicker, and he does. We take him out, then it's time to take out Joe. We fight our way through tons of vultures, and eventually get to him where he bear hugs us until we pass out. But we are absolute badasses, and after a short dream sequence about Emily and what happened, we learn for ourselves that the wife arm is real. We bash our skull into him, punch him in his tummy, and that's it. As we hurtle to the ground, the credits roll. So, as you can tell, it's rough. I could just say wife arm and end this section of the video there, and I'm highly tempted to, but I guess I should actually talk about it. Sorry. I want to start with the mission design because it's just so painfully boring. All you ever have to do is swing your way through a level, kill some enemies, and hack a relay point. The story is nowhere to be seen besides text or small tidbits from dialogue throughout the game. Even then, the wife arm surprise comes out of left field completely and just makes little to no sense. I have to be truthful that I didn't read every single thing shown in the text at each relay point, but nothing seemed to be building up to this point. It was constant questions about where she went, but never an answer until out of nowhere, it's wife arm time. With the major plot holes aside, the worst part of this experience for me is definitely the mission design and how we eventually get to that point. To start, the missions are basically the same. You run from one side of the level to the other just to reach those almighty rally points I've told you so much about already. But luckily for us, the rally isn't accessible until all enemies are dead. And not to say that this is a bad thing, but the game has a slight issue of it being a relatively empty map, then at the end they hit you with 3 mechs and 20 regular enemies. And there seems to be no rhyme or reason as to why this happens. Something this game does very well is withhold information from the player. Not only during the main story, but even during the boss battles where we are using weapons we've never used before. I was so incredibly confused when I was trying to use the tarantula and the rockets would go towards the Barak and just narrowly miss it as they swerve around. It's not only that which is a little annoying about the boss fights, but in the same one, you cannot hurt the helicopter plane VTOL thing in any other way, not even other explosives. Unless I'm just an absolute dumbass, there's nothing to hint towards this. I'm not talking about hand-holding or full tutorials right before boss fights, but in my personal opinion and my inability to accept defeat when a challenge presents itself, a little hint in the corner or even just a subtle little nudge in the right direction in the dialogue is a good thing, but there's nothing here. Dark Souls explains more than this game ever would, but that's not to say the boss fights weren't at least a little fun. I did find the Mohole to be one of my favorites technically, and I think that's more because I felt like I was learning attack patterns while trying to fight this giant alien robot thing. It was interesting enough with using a mix of our powers, but also taking away a major part of our mobility and movement. There is really nothing to swing on here, but you do attach to the giant eyeball thing, and use death from above while falling onto it. It's so much more fun and interesting compared to the last two. So let's start with Groder, which it is a fight all about pattern memorization, but nothing as interesting as the Mohole. And by that, I mean there's 2 attacks you have to dodge. And when you do, you can slap him with your arm and drop kick him. He doesn't do much. The Hitler wannabe gets tired after a single attack. Then with Super Joe, who I'm sure you all know was an original character from way back in the day, turns out to be evil. And it's a little sad, but this fight that we've been building towards is just a spectacle. Don't get me wrong, it's cool, but it's just a ton of quick time events, which I'm okay with being in games, but not in the final fight. Just like with the Order 1886, I had an issue with it there because that is the final fight, and so is this one. We fly around and spam some buttons, tear off wings, and destroy things with half-decent animations, but even the final quote-unquote boss dies in a cutscene. There's no fun fight, we kill 3, maybe 4 vultures, and then we headbutt him as hard as possible, punch him in the stomach, and he's dead. Like I said, it's cool, it's a spectacle, but we don't even really get to use our newfound power with our wife arm, which could have made the fight so much better. We could have smacked the shit out of him, but we use our head. Which, if I used my head, to be honest, I'd still probably be playing this game. It was actually pretty fun. The arm really makes everything a lot more interesting. The shooting fundamentally is pretty standard. It's not the best, but it's also not the worst. The arm makes the experience so much more enjoyable. Not only can we shoot while swinging around, but we can grab someone and shoot them with a sort of forced aimbot while they're stuck in place and trying to shock you. And even being able to fire a couple shots into a heavier enemy, like a heavy, and to jump into the air and drop kick them is actually lots of fun. It turns what is a pretty basic system with little to no enemy variety and turns it into something that is interesting to use, and you can mix things together, which definitely helps in that way. Even the weapons have just enough variety to also make things more interesting than point and shoot, but once you have more of these special weapons, the enemies do sort of melt. And I think that the developers knew that, and that's why they put 30 enemies in a small area. The sort of China Lake thing just absolutely obliterates anything, putting down mechs in 3 to 4 shots, which means you can kill 2 of them with 1 pickup, while the machine gun just mows people down, leaving you no real reason to use grenades unless you have a mech and you're stuck with just a pistol. But even then, if you can kite around one of them, you can spam the kick button over and over, basically keeping them in sort of a stun lock. Even the flying ones are vulnerable to this, because they eventually do land and try to take you on head to head, but they're no match for wife arm. I'm not saying everything here is perfect, it is a little janky, especially when trying to keep that stun lock and you attach to the floor next to the mech or just ahead of it. That was loud as shit. Alright, I think they're far away now. Where was I? But it's still a fun system, even with the jank. Even the artistic choice of having a never-ending magazine is pretty cool, but everything put together made the experience pretty easy. And with my playthrough only being 4.5 hours long, makes it pretty quick, and something I could see myself coming back to on a later date, and going back to Y Farm, that helps with it too. Swinging around the environments we find ourselves in is pretty fun. It feels about as good as any Spider-Man game up to that point. The only real thing that bothers me is that the range of the swing feels incredibly short, and that's where a majority of my deaths came from. I felt sometimes that there isn't enough relay for a precision swinging mechanic. There's lock on and stuff in place to make it easier, but in terms of range, if you're even a millimeter away, you just fall to your death. Other than that, it does feel pretty good, and a small detail a lot of games with swinging mechanics get wrong is getting stuck and wrapped around things like poles and signs, which this game actually does. The rope or wire or whatever you want to call it actually has physics, which is impressive to me. I know Spider-Man 2 had these same mechanics, but it's still not something we see all that often. There's also a zip mechanic which I can use on our enemies or in our general movement. If we use the zip onto the enemy, it's the drop kick I've talked about before. But if it's on a platform, we can just land perfectly on the thing. We can also zip to the walls that surround us within reason. Even from time to time, we can swing on certain walls. But the game's way of telling us we can't is that these walls and areas are irradiated, which makes it so our bionics just don't work. I think this could have easily been an open world with an amazing swing mechanic, but the levels are just incredibly linear. We swing from one end to the other on a very straight and narrow path, with not much choice of where to go or how to go. There are firewalls that kill you instantly, or death drops, and even the use of mines to traverse feels very lazy in a way to pad out the game. We reach a relay and have to disable these floating mines which were once electricitized. You know, I'm doing this on purpose and now I just can't say the word. Like, I just made up a word. And have to disable these floating mines which were once electricized. Fuck it! But all of this combined makes it, like I said, an incredibly short experience, with not much room for exploration. The world in general isn't the most interesting, but the variety of places we go keeps it interesting enough in the short 4 or 5 hours we spend in the world the first time around. Going from Gray City with neon advertisements for things like Pepsi, Nvidia, and Dark Void, which we all know came out 8 months later and didn't do very well either. It's sort of weird seeing these advertisements in a game where the world is falling apart. And it also feels just so out of place in video games in general. I never quite cared about games like Skate and Tony Hawk having endorsements from Adidas, Monster, Red Bull, or any other skate brand. Hell, even having vending machines with things like Dr. Pepper in a real world setting. But Nvidia? In this world? What, does my bionic wife arm have an RTX 4090 pre-installed? I'm being way over dramatic as always. I could honestly care less if I really tried, so fuck it. Make your bag, Capcom. Not like you need the extra cash these days anyway. Then there are the water levels where you have to use your swing in the right way to stay above the water, because you will sink and the wife arm just drags you down, but luckily can work underwater to help get you out. They're probably my favorite portions to play through in the game because of the perceived choice of being able to go where you want, are the jungle sections, which really aren't any different. Besides that, instead of signs and mines to get from A to B, you have trees and branches. I think personally my least favorite area was the underground and mine sections, because it becomes increasingly difficult to swing, which you're still able to, but it doesn't feel as fluid in these tight corridors and holes. The world is built for ease of movement with the swinging wife arm, and having those parts with a major downtime and difficulty swinging feel dragged. But I guess it has purpose in every game, just like the overly bright and obvious collectibles scattered across the world, and they feel out of place, just like the advertisements. But this is something I haven't really talked about much, but I like collecting achievements, and there is an achievement attached to this, and the game makes this easier by giving us a count for each area, and overall being a pretty easy game to achievement hunt for. The hardest parts of the process are probably collecting these collectibles, completing the in-game challenges, and beating the game on commando. but it's nothing that'll take too long. It makes it an easy enough and short, fun 20-hour experience for those who want a quick 100% or platinum depending on where you play it. Even then, if you are one of those people, it's a pretty low volume game. Not many people in the grand scheme of things have put the time in to get these trophies. Maybe more so on PlayStation because of the platinum incentive, but on Xbox, the completion percentage is only about 4%. I usually talk about graphics, but I'm not too sure on this one. I'm not the most caught up with games around this time. Of course, I could compare it to games like Grand Theft Auto 4 and Mirror's Edge, which are both still regarded as beautiful, but that would seem unfair because it wasn't the standard. The game looks so good for what it is. I wouldn't say it's as large as an Activision or Rockstar game, but it also could have just looked worse. There's not major gripes I have with it. No motion sickness or muddy textures where you couldn't tell what is what. No horrendous lighting issues, it's all just okay. But the performance is less than desirable in spots. When there's too much going on, or just while looking in certain directions, the frame rate drops by 20 plus, making it feel unplayable, and hard to keep up with the pace of shooting and fighting with the Y-Farm. It made certain areas a little soiled in my idea of them, even though deep inside I know it doesn't affect the design and the area, but it makes it feel just a little blech. The game was a major low point for Capcom, and didn't help that their output at the time wasn't selling or reviewing all that well, and I honestly think the poor sales, which is still 27,000 first week, is what killed the series. The first Rearmed game, which felt like a trial run, sold over 100k first week. Then to have the massive dip probably made them stop and made Rearmed 2 not do as well as the first, which I believe sold even less than 27k first week. It's sad to see a game that had potential coming out of a well-established publisher die and be left behind. Overall, I wouldn't say it's a bad game. It's actually pretty fun in the short time we have with it. It's not perfect, and everybody will have their gripes with everything. It's passable as a video game and worth a try if you can find it on sale or secondhand. I am a physical collector, and I found a copy brand new at a local store for only $20, which may be a little bit overpriced, but I felt like it was worth it. And well, I get a video out of it. I mean, I would give it a 6 out of 10, but like I said, what the fuck do I know?